All right. I think I got it now, finally. Got to use my earpiece. All right. People might be tired of trying to follow me now. I done tried this 3 times, so I might have blew any bit of listenership. Hey, what's up? Somebody let me know if you can hear me. Because I was having trouble. Can you hear me now? I got my earpiece in. Somebody told me that's what it takes. Somebody give me a yes if you can hear me. I done tried this 3 times. I'm terrible with this technology thing. So I done messed my phone up. So I think that's what it is. I'm pretty sure. All right, cool. Y'all can hear me. All right, cool. All right, perfect. All right, let me go ahead and get into it for anybody that listens later. I was invited to an event at the Capitol to speak on remembrance of Dr. Martin Luther King. And there's a couple things I didn't get to touch on, so I wanted to bring it to the live group. And I think it's something we need to think about anyway. So, I say, unfortunately, it's the 50th anniversary of MLK's assassination. Obviously, we lost this great man. I think it's imperative that if we're going to remember the man, that it is very smart that we actually try to take in the whole man. If you understand, and we always talk about during the Martin Luther King holiday every year, how on the radio you hear the same speeches and realize that, since it's been 50 years since we lost him, I'm 44 years old, so there's a lot of us who obviously didn't experience Martin Luther King at all, or the millennial group, or whatever the case may be. So it is imperative that we are teaching his true entire history and who he was, especially up at the point that we lost Dr. Martin Luther King, because that's the only way that if there's any idea of carrying on the legacy, the only way to do that is to make sure we're not only getting, in a sense, this bastardized microwave cookie cutter approach to who Dr. Martin Luther King was. For the most part, in our school systems in which they may learn about MLK, or as again I highlight during the holiday, we hear the I Have a Dream speech, which is the most amazing speech probably in human history, or at least one of. And because of that, that's kind of the area where we kind of lay it at the feet of Dr. Martin Luther King to say, hey, he was, for every black boy, white girl, and red child, and whatever race, being able to sit and play together. And we know that he was able to push for integration in the South specifically. Sometimes we lose sight of that was something that happened specifically in the South. And so while it was in a sense a great win, understand that in retrospect, Dr. King himself even wondered about, had he taken the best approach for the African American community, when he ended up saying to his good friend Andrew Young that he may have taken his people into a burning house when he thought about the idea of having them integrate. A lot of times people, let's make sure we put that quote in context. A lot of people will now learn that because we are in the information age, so people are coming to learn more about kind of where Martin Luther King stood later in his life. But again, I don't know if we do a good job of teaching it to the next generation, or even being taught to our generation. We can't accept, again, the cookie cutter approach that we always hear. But even breaking down that quote, a lot of times people will hear it now and say, hey, by the end of his life, he didn't know if, integration was, that good. And to put it in the context, he was talking about the idea that that his first focus was social, versus he came to realize that economics probably should have been his first focus, but he focused on the social. He came to realize that on a trip to LA, where he goes out there, and a lot of the brothers and sisters in LA, they didn't even want to, he'd already did the Montgomery bus boycott by this time. And so he was well known throughout the South, and you would think throughout the nation. Obviously, he was known as an agitator throughout the nation with the FBI, things of that nature. But he goes out to LA, and people really didn't even want to hear him speak, or they was like, get out of here. And he was kind of taken back by that. But he realized, and he said this, he said that he in the South, whereas he had been fighting for people to be able to, in a sense, eat a hamburger with a white brother or sister per se. Out there, that hadn't been an issue in the West. The bigger issue was they couldn't afford the hamburger in the first place. So there was his, kind of relook and say, okay, maybe I made a mistake going in that. But if you take the cookie cutter approach of what you always hear, then you don't learn about before he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. You don't learn or hear about the fact that he was going to march on Washington again. And at this time, it was the Poor People's Campaign. See, he wanted to do, because he wanted to take a more economic approach. Now, for people that learn that information, you want to give some context to that. So for people who even come and learn about that information, quite often you will see in today's time, things get very politicalized, or whatever, however you say that word. But anyway, to the extent that, yes, there is a lot of intersectionality between poor and race. Now, in today's time, we'll equate those things as equal, which if you read and understand Dr. Martin Luther King, yes, he did say quite often that there was a lot similar between the poor white and the African American. So yes, he said that, but at the same time, Dr. Martin Luther King, you can go see videos in which he recommended that our community be proud to be black. In today's time, that will get confused in a cookie cutter world in which, we're too sensitive about, how we see things in the African American community. We're absolutely all down with the Wakanda movement and always talk about being proud to be black. But in the bigger context of America, basically, that's seen as some form of isolation. Not fair when we think about the day that we lose Dr. Martin Luther King. He was a man who advocated that we be proud to be black. Because, see, in today's time, it'll be bastardized as some form of isolation without people taking the context to realize the reason why, for example, he wanted us to be proud to be black was because we knew that there was a lot of self-hatred projected on the way that we saw ourselves in this country. And the reality is a lot of that hasn't changed. So when we see pushes to not celebrate a Black history or pushes not to celebrate a Dr. Martin Luther King holiday, then when you understand who he really was, you would understand that goes directly against what Dr. Martin Luther King would have wanted. But if you bastardize his message and you say that's some type of division, then we will keep moving forward where, for example, Black history is not being studied in a lot of schools. Now, here's the irony of that. Black history, for example, came from Black Negro Week started by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, whose overall goal in bringing along those stories, because they were not studied or discovered until he became the first to kind of bring forward African-American stories, to the forefront. His overall goal was that Black history or Black History Week, bringing that discovery, was in fact American history. So his overall goal was we would one day rid ourselves of Black History Month because Black history, American history, would be put in the context of American history. But what is the movement now? The movement now is to push it away and not separate it. And we use it under the guise of Dr. Martin Luther King. And in fact, if you're understanding what I'm saying, it goes completely against the concept. Dr. Martin Luther King, who wanted us to be proud to be black, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who started his Negro History Week with never knowing they would grow into a Black History Month, but who started Negro History Week with the idea that once this information will be brought about, it will be added to American history. See, that is a correct approach to how, in a sense, to incorporate Black Americans into the American system. But now we've bastardized his message that we now say that's some type of division. So again, this is putting his history in context. These are the things that we must teach our children. Another thing specifically towards the African American community, we hear that bastardized message of just, I have a dream. This was his dream. How do we carry on that legacy without in the way that we sometimes look at it, some of us in the community, there's this idea of passiveness that gets attached to Dr. Martin Luther King that is absolutely, completely unfair, because a lot of times we tend to pit, for example, Martin Luther King's approach against a Malcolm X approach. And so kind of people will choose sides. This is what we do after the fact. And we now see, getting to know to the near the end of their lives, they were actually saying a lot of the same messaging. And again, it was an economic approach. But unfortunately, sometimes when you don't know Martin Luther King's history, you will make the mistake of listening to people to say he took a passive approach, an approach that now hasn't served any purpose. So for people that believe that, then you need to actually look at things that happened at that time. There's this famous, I don't know if it's necessarily famous, but there's this one article that I always post during Dr. Martin Luther King's holiday on the Mental Dialogue Facebook page that says you don't really know what Dr. Martin Luther King did. And it's somebody's personal account to how things were before Dr. Martin Luther King basically made our community fearless in the face of what was happening in the South, specifically with white supremacists. It was a time where you could easily get lynched. It was a time where if you spoke too loud around a white woman, you could actually go to jail. Our people literally, even in, literally if they were walking on the sidewalk and a white woman was walking down the sidewalk, he literally would have to step off the sidewalk, not just let her pass by, but step off the sidewalk. Like, this is how our people were carrying it on, because our community lived in complete fear of any minute now, any day now, they could be lynched. Like, sometimes in today's time, we are fearful, for example, of police brutality in that manner. But the lynchings of those times, there was a almost a 20-year period where there was a lynching every day. That's what the numbers averaged out to over the course of how many lynchings would happen per year. There was at least, a lynching once a week, not every, for at least 25 years, there was at least one lynching every week. So imagine that in today's social media time, if we were able to broadcast that. So while, of course, within our community, when you're relating police brutality and things of that nature, where, an African American is twice as likely to be, for example, shot and killed by a cop in today's time. Historically, it's about 4 to 1. African American to be more likely killed than a white, for example. That's the history, but now it's around 2 to 1. But anyway, when we think about the type of mindset it puts us in when we hear of a Stephon Clark, the most recent tragedy of this nature, imagine if it was happening weekly and there was social media. So to be fair to the complete legacy and understanding the man, when this man put forward and basically took on the South, Jim Crow laws in the manner that he did, and here's the manner that he did it. Keep this in mind. If somebody hits you and you respond back and hit them back by nature based on the fact they are attacking you, that's actually easy. But he understood, based on the numbers that we had, that it was impossible for a class with no money, 12, 13% of the country at most, maybe bigger numbers in the South, but still with no military. He understood that was an impossible, it was actually a suicidal approach at that time. And he even talked about certain rebellions that always ended negatively within the country based on our numbers anytime that those violent rebellions took place. So again, it's easy to respond and understand that that's our nature, and we boldly say, well, that's how we would react, or that would have been better. But in order to be effective, in which the Ku Klux Klan could literally ride around the South for any reason whatsoever and snatch you up and take you for your family, hang you, burn you, cut your penis off, whatever they chose to do, when that was something that was inevitable at all times. It was actually Dr. Martin Luther King's approach that says, even if you kill us, even if you kill us, we are not going to stop. We are no longer afraid of death. There's no more manhood than that. Even with you, and that's what was the change of the tide. Because now those white supremacists understood we can't scare these people. That was the changing of the tide. So again, I just wanted to give a couple of concepts to make sure we understand that we must learn and know about this man's entire history in order for you, in order for us to carry on the legacy, teach it all. If your children do not know some of what I talked about today, as a parent, that's your fault, because the schools don't teach that part. They don't teach the Martin Luther King's legacy in context. There's no way to carry it on properly if we don't know the history exactly what it is. I heard at today's luncheon, one of the brothers says, we don't study history. We don't look back at history. He said it, let me get it correct. He said, we look back at history as a reference point, not as a residence. And I thought to myself as I heard the brother say that unfortunately, we don't have the reference point right. So if you look back at history with a bastardized, small microcosm of what that history really is, and your reference is incorrect, then you can't use that reference correctly to move forward. That was my thinking to myself. But I'm still happy to be be a part of today's luncheon, and it was some amazing other panelists. Thank you to Janelle Jones specifically for inviting me out, and definitely we met one amazing brother who's heavily into prison reform here in the here in Georgia specifically, and so. I was glad to have met that brother. For anybody that know my history in mass incarceration is an area that is of grave importance, and I think is an area that Martin Luther King would absolutely be focused on, because we also consider, as he considered himself the drum major for peace, he definitely was a drum major for the least of us. And, we live in a world now where focusing on ourselves and not focusing on the quote unquote least of us has become the norm. So we definitely are not living out that man's legacy. Or we know this great man that we lost who fought for all of us. What's up, Mark? Who fought for all of us, who are in a sense the have-nots. And so keep that in mind, that if you want to remember Martin Luther King correctly, first, learn the legacy, read about it, learn the history specifically. It will definitely help you in your own life. And secondly, consider the least of us, whether that be helping the homeless or that another place is those that are brothers and sisters that are locked up in prison. We have over 500,000 fathers locked up currently in the African American community, and that's not okay. It's not okay. And let's make sure we don't reduce it down to you shouldn't do wrong or you shouldn't have been doing wrong, when there's unfortunately grave injustice in our justice system. And so that's why I think Dr. Martin Luther King would be focused in that area, because if you want to keep a people down, the only best way to do it worldwide, historically, not just in the United States, is to over-police them. And when I say over-police, that's not a direct shot at the police. We need police. We need to have a relationship with police within our community, and that's not something that has went very well over the years. But the reason the relationship is severed is because we've been over-policed, meaning stopped, not always for warranted reasons, and at the end of the day, policing becomes a number game. If you stop one group more than the other, then you're absolutely going to have more arrests, more convictions of that group, versus doing it in a fair manner so that you're only, in a sense, catching up those who have, in a sense, stepped outside the law. Whereas now we currently have a couple of states where now the very thing that could have got you locked up for 20, 30 years is actually okay when it comes to, for example, the drug laws and marijuana, which I am an advocate. I don't care about smoking weed, but I am an advocate of ridding ourselves of the fake drug war that was used to basically lock up people for the only crime where the person selling and the person receiving have both agreed to. Think of any other crime where there is, in a sense, there's a victim. The victim didn't want it to happen, and the perpetrator transgressed the victim. We have this thing that now we're seeing with the opioids being moved into a health and mental condition, which is what it really is. And so I'm happy that that's happening in the country. And so as African Americans, we need to ride the coattail of that push, no matter who's doing it, no matter that it took it happening to whites. Let's jump on the coattails and make sure that we take advantage of ending mass incarceration, ending the drug war, places where I think Dr. Martin Luther King would be focused if he were here today, in my personal opinion, if I could interject that into this video. But thank y'all for the time that you listen. At the end of the day, two things. Know the entire history. Make sure your children know. If you don't know, learn and teach them. Information age is easy to do. And secondly, always consider battling for the least of us. And that's how we can lift the entire community and the entire country. Thank you.